Thank you all so much for coming. A few housekeeping items before I introduce the real reason that you guys are all here. In the unlikely event of a fire, yada, 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 you guys know the drill. A few things about how this event is going to, please tell me you guys know what door to go out of if there's a fire. Please do not go out the window. That would be very bad for us. Anyhow, so the way that this event is going to go is it's going to be like a lot of our other events. We're going to start with a lecture from our guest, and then we're going to do a Q&A session. Grace, go ahead and wave, Grace. Grace is going to be our Q&A person, so when the time comes, she'll stand up, let you all know, and just form a line down that aisle right there to ask your question. And if you have spicy questions, or if you have questions that disagree with our speaker, please let us know. We'll be hanging out in the back. We'll make sure that your question gets asked. Few other housekeeping items. This event is being live streamed, so make with that information what you will. And then after the event, please grab some stuff off the back. We have a lot of cool stickers and stuff, as well as, because you guys are all here, you all are invited to our event on February 15th. That is going to be in 327, just down the hallway. It'll be our spring meeting. So talking about speakers, all that, hope to see you there. And then also say hi to my friend Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Sarah is with the National Journalism Center. They're a project of Young America's Foundation, just like us. If you have any interest in being a journalist, or if you have any interest in writing, please talk to Sarah. She can definitely get you set up, chat with you, all the good stuff. So I'm going to stop blabbering now. The reason you all are here is because of our guest, Ian Haworth. Ian is originally from across the pond in the United Kingdom, where he graduated from college there with a computer science degree, and then came to the land of freedom to work for big tech. Kind of ironic. After working for big tech for a while, he realized the anti-conservative bias that was inherent in a lot of the systems that they were creating. So he decided to become a journalist, just like you can do with NJC. I promise I was not paid to say that. After that, he worked for the Daily Wire, and now he spends his time talking to fine folks like yourselves at college campuses across the country about a myriad of different issues, including anti-conservative bias in big tech, the Israel and Hamas war, and our topic of the evening, the pro-life movement, and what men specifically can do to help end abortion. Please join me in welcoming Ian Haworth.
Hi, everyone. Let me just balance all of this. So apparently I'm competing with free cannolis tonight and Build-A-Bear, which is apparently people do on campus now. So thank you all for coming and turning down free desserts and bears. So I don't know who's the smartest one. Hopefully us, right? But it's great to be back in DC. So right now the world feels like it's going crazy. The economy's doomed. Inflation's out of control. The border is being completely overrun. War is raging in Europe and the Middle East. China is tightening its grip on the West through the economy, debt, and TikTok. And there are a bunch of culture wars. There's the radical LGBTQ, ABCDEFI, AO, whatever, agenda being pushed on kids. There's critical race theory. There's gun rights. There's the obsession with climate change. There's anti-Semitism exploding across the country. But then there's the political and cultural battle that I think goes far deeper. That's the battle over abortion. In terms of political and cultural battles, it's hard to think of one that's more important. Every election cycle, abortion is just farmed out to use really as a motivation for people to vote one way or the other. But every election cycle, neither side really has a plan. And the GOP really doesn't have a plan. Because abortion is just one of those buzzwords used to sell promises and get votes and raise money. Every election cycle, the left will come out and say that we're one vote away from the Handmaid's Tale or something. And here's a hint, we're not. And all the right seems to do in Congress is raise money on banning abortion. But here's the problem. No one is talking honestly about abortion. And no one has a real plan for abortion beyond fear-mongering and fundraising. Because they refuse to understand that it's a cultural problem, not a political problem. I think abortion is really the greatest crime of modern America. Nothing comes close. But it's not enough to just think that abortion is wrong. We need to have a plan for what to do next. I mean, what happened with Roe versus Wade? After decades of fundraising and campaigning and really hard work, Roe versus Wade was overturned, and rightly so, but the GOP had no plan for what came next. So what happened? A bunch of states immediately came out with more laws protecting abortion. So yes, overturning Roe versus Wade is a huge deal and honestly something I never thought would happen. Things are just as divisive, if not more divisive. In 2022, Exit polls showed that for a lot of voters, the ability to kill your baby mattered more than crime or the economy or the border. And we're seeing abortion become a central issue in this election. So that should make us ask what we can do next. And what are we doing wrong? Well, here's where I think we can start. We need to approach abortion from two different angles: honesty and compassion. We need to speak honestly about the reality of abortion, and we need to speak to the people getting abortions, women, with compassion. Every time I see someone on social media calling for women getting abortions to just get thrown in jail, I honestly cringe a little bit. Why? Because while they're getting rage clicks, the pro-life movement is being set back. Because if we're approaching this with honesty and compassion, let's focus on the main problem at the center of abortion, and that's men. Men are to blame for the vast majority of abortions. The solution to abortion isn't legislation. The solution is men taking responsibility. Ending abortion is really complicated, but ending most abortions is actually really simple. How do we stop 70% of abortions from ever happening? Men just need to step up. So let me back up and start from the beginning a little bit. Whenever I speak about abortion, especially as a man, I get a bunch of the same responses over and over. I'm told that I hate women, that I want them to die. I'm told that abortion is a constitutional right. It's really not. Or I'm told that I want to control women's bodies and force them into pregnancy. And this is all news to me, obviously. Then there are the general slogans like, abortion is healthcare. If you don't want an abortion, don't get one. Or it's just a bundle of cells. But then there are a bunch of responses that hinge on gender. Things like, my body, my choice. Why do you even care about abortion if you're a man? You can't get pregnant. If men could get pregnant, there would be drive-through abortion clinics. And then the best one, no uterus, no opinion. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard at least some of those. Of course, to accept this stuff, you first have to agree that men and women are biologically different. But as we all know, this is now controversial. We live in a world where Dylan Mulvaney, who is a man, can slap on some lipstick, throw on a dress, and is now invited to the White House as a policy advisor. Rachel Levine, one of the world's least convincing women, is now one of Biden's leaders in health policy. And they gave a Woman of the Year award to a man. There's not even an age limit to this belief. We're supposed to believe that children are capable of deciding their gender. 3-year-olds who routinely think they're dogs, cats, or Spider-Man. We should apparently trust them with making life-changing decisions. Eat ice cream until you die? No, that's silly. Take hormones and cut off my penis? Go for it. And if you don't embrace this delusion, you're just smeared as a bigot. This is even true for adult men like swimmer Leah Thomas, balls and all. He says he's a woman. That's all that's supposed to matter to us. Biological sex is now irrelevant, except for when it comes to abortion. When it comes to abortion, sex and gender suddenly back on the table. When they really need it, the left will whip out biological reality and cry victim. Suddenly, men and women are not the same thing. Suddenly, men and women are not interchangeable. Suddenly, men are not permitted to have an opinion because they're a man, if it's the wrong opinion. In one instant, they went from telling us that men can get pregnant and give birth and chest feed, whatever that means, to telling us that men can't oppose abortion because they don't have a uterus. And as a man without a uterus, last time I checked, let's first debunk these male-specific responses. First, let's take the response, why do you even care if you're a man? And I think the answer is pretty obvious. I care because I think murder is wrong. And murder is wrong whether I'm a man, woman, black, white, or green. Next, well, you can't get pregnant. Again, so what? My biological ability or inability to get pregnant has nothing to do with the morality of an abortion. There's the fan favorite, no uterus, no opinion. Same answer. Morality doesn't change based on what organs I have. But I want us to think about this one. If men could get pregnant, abortion would be legal anywhere, anytime, for any reason. And there would be drive-through abortion clinics. I think this one's a bit different because I actually think it's true. If men could get pregnant, way more men would support abortion. Not all men, of course, but a lot of men. And why is that? Well, it's because most men suck. At least the men of today's broken society suck. Not all men, a lot of men. Again, this is all built on the biological reality that men and women are different. Women and men usually have different attitudes to relationships, sex, and children. Not better or worse, different. And the main difference? Only women can get pregnant. People might not like it, but the main biological point of sex is to reproduce. So if you're doing it right, sex comes with the possibility that the woman might get pregnant. For some people, it's a chance. For others, it's a terrifying risk. But it doesn't really matter how you frame it. If a man and a woman have sex, the woman might get pregnant. The man won't. This is one of the main reasons sex is different for men and women. The stakes are higher for women than men, especially in a society that doesn't have any values. The man knows he can't get pregnant, so he can just run away from the problem. He can leave 30 seconds after sex. He can leave any time after the baby is born. He can leave before the baby is born. Men have been doing this for as long as men have existed. Thank goodness we can't say the same for women. But abortion makes all of this so much easier for these crappy men. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card that saves them the hassle of even having to pack. Even better, for these men at least, now that some women have embraced abortion anytime, anywhere, for any reason, they don't even really need convincing. So the original goal of the feminist movement generally was to even the playing field, which I think is an important and moral aim. It's only because of men who refused to share power that we needed the initial feminist movement in the first place. But there are two ways to achieve equality beyond things like equal rights when we think about morality and behavior. The first is to make men better. The second is to make women worse. To make women like men, but the worst types of men. And driven by the modern feminist movement, many have chosen the second option. A lot of men want to have casual sex without consequences. So instead of trying to make these men better, society has decided that women should want casual sex without consequences too, to make women like men in all the worst ways. Yes, it's wrong that men can have casual sex and avoid the responsibility, but the answer is to make things right and build a society where men take responsibility. And not to make things worse by pushing women to avoid the consequences of sex as well. It's also no surprise that with abortion, men get to keep having casual sex. I'm sorry, it's so dry. So now with abortion, men can have more casual sex than ever with fewer consequences. It's a win-win, but in the worst way for the worst people. Everyone gets exactly what they want, except for the millions of unborn babies being sucked out and flushed down the toilet. But there's a problem with how the pro-life movement is handling the fight against abortion. Almost all the time is spent criticizing the abortion movement by just focusing on women. Why are men getting yet another free pass? Yes, a big part of the problem is the growing number of women who see no problem in getting an abortion. Abortion is looked at like birth control by some people. But we have to realize that men are a massive part of the problem too. I'll go as far as to say they're the main problem. Again, not all men, a lot of men. To break this down, I want to share some numbers with you that really don't get that much attention. And these numbers will help us look at abortion through a different lens. Whenever we talk about abortion, we're usually pushed to think about desperate teenagers getting abortions so their lives aren't completely ruined. But the vast majority of women who get abortions are in their 20s and 30s. Just 9% are teenagers. So if being too young isn't the reason, why are they doing it? Here's an idea. 85% of women who had abortions were unmarried. It's 85%. And what about the reasons why? 73% said they couldn't afford a baby. 42% said it's because they weren't married. 14% said that they didn't have enough support from their male partner. 12% said their male partner was unemployed. 48% said they didn't want to be a single mother or were having relationship problems. 14% said their male partner wanted them to have an abortion. I honestly think that's the worst one. Take a second and think about those numbers I just threw at you. What went through your head when I listed them off? You know what went through my head? Yes, I see a woman making a really bad decision, and that's what a lot of the pro-life movement sees. But you know what I really see is a ton of crappy men. men who have failed to live up to their responsibilities, men who put women in the position of feeling like they couldn't handle or afford a child. These men are the root of the problem behind abortion. Men who want to have sex with no consequences, men who don't want to be able to really live up to their responsibilities, men who want to abandon their partners, men who don't want to marry the woman they've gotten pregnant, men who don't want to work to support their partner. There's another thing that gets brought up all the time when conservatives talk about abortion, and that's the issue of race, in that a massively disproportionate number of women who get abortions are black. But why am I bringing this up? It's not to deflect or to dunk on the black community somehow, or to throw out some red meat talking points about Planned Parenthood and their racist legacy. Too many people bring up the racial breakdown to correctly attack Democratic Party policy, but how does this help people now? Instead, why don't we think and ask ourselves why so many black women are getting abortions? Might it be because almost 70% of black babies are born into single-parent homes? 70% is up from 25% in 1965 at the height of the civil rights movement. When these women are being abandoned by men and live in disproportionately poor neighborhoods with no support and no opportunities, are we seriously surprised that they're desperate for a way out? If we actually care about fighting abortion, then we need to look at the problem again, honestly. That includes looking at the why, not just the what. So being pro-life is difficult, and being a pro-life man is often even harder because we have to deal with other men who support abortion for selfish reasons. Even some pro-life men are pro-life in theory. How many men are pro-life right up until they get their girlfriend pregnant? How many conservative politicians can you think of who've probably paid for an abortion at some point? Don't get me wrong, many women are wrong for getting abortions, and I'm not making excuses for their decisions. But I am saying that it's possible to also empathize with the situation they've been put in by men. This is where compassion really comes in. Yes, in the vast majority of cases, these women chose to have sex. They knew the risk, but this is being used as a slogan to completely ignore the man's responsibility. Would these women still get an abortion if their partner was supportive? If their partner provided? If their partner married them? Again, 73% of women said they got an abortion because they thought they couldn't afford the child. What if the man who got these women pregnant got off the couch and worked their asses off to support the children? If men stepped up, 73% of abortions wouldn't happen. And men are the cause of so many other abortions too. What about the 2% of abortions because of rape and incest? These only happen because an evil man committed an evil act in the first place. So when you're pro-life, you're accused of some honestly really horrible things. At times it feels like we're trapped in a twilight zone, surrounded by people cheering on really just murder. Being a pro-life man is really hard because we're dismissed because we can't give birth ourselves. But here's what I want every pro-life man to take away, and pro-life women too for that matter. There's more we can do beyond protesting the decision of abortion, because at that point it's almost too late. At the same time, we can try to empathize with the choice many women are making, even if we think it's an awful choice, and understand that for every abortion, there's a man who is either there or not. It's time we hold these men account too. It's time we push our male friends and relatives to commit to the women they get pregnant, to take responsibility, to grow up, to provide, to care for, to protect, to be a man. Yes, there are some women who take glee in getting abortions, but there are many women who are getting abortions out of pure desperation. And as more and more unborn children are murdered in the womb, it's about time we hold the man equally responsible as the woman, even if the man is long gone. If men can step up, we can take a massive step in the right direction. Thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to answering any questions you may have. Also, just a quick note, if anyone disagrees as well, please don't be afraid or uncomfortable to ask a question. I'm not here to try and make you feel, stupid or embarrassed.
Okay. Good evening, Ian. Thank you for coming. My name is Matthew. I'm an accounting major here at CUA. One of the things that we learn in our business school here is the idea of freedom for versus freedom from something. So I feel like a lot of men these days are running with the freedom from definition of freedom, and so is the Supreme Court in a sense. When they had the Roe precedent in place, having liberty as abortion seems very, not in line with what we think of liberty, but it is when you think about it in the freedom from case. So my question has to do with what other things that, what can we as young men especially do in this day to kind of help influence our peers or help influence the law so that we can ensure that abortions don't happen from a men's perspective?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to realize that this isn't going to happen through legislation. I think a lot of people, politicians mainly, like to hold up legislation as the solution because they want to remain in business, right? And their business is selling us promises and then not delivering on them and selling us more promises. I think we need to realize that abortion is a cultural issue, and it's an issue where the entire society has just accepted abortion as either a good, a moral good, or something in the middle where we don't really talk about it. I think for men, it's often in the middle of, well, I'm not going to get an abortion. I don't really know how I feel about it because I haven't thought that deeply about it. I'll just ignore it until someone gets pregnant, and then suddenly it's a sudden reality that I've never thought about. And so I think on a personal level, my answer is always take responsibility for everything in your life. And that will put you in good stead for all of these decisions. And so if, for example, you are terrified by the idea of pregnancy, and I'm not going to lie, for a lot of young men and women, pregnancy is not ideal. So the answer to that is to not have sex, or if you're going to have sex, take every precaution that exists out there that are freely available so that the risk of pregnancy is to the point that you're happy with that risk. Obviously, not having sex at all until you're ready for the responsibility is the best answer here, because it's something that requires responsibility and should be respected. So that's something you can do on an individual level. Holding your peers and your friends to account when they fail in their responsibilities is also something that's very important. Not pressurizing people, but respecting those who take responsibility is a way to emulate that through your own life, and then other people will follow. And then it matters generationally too. So if you think about how we raise young boys and young girls, raising them to respect people who live moral lives that we want to emulate is important. If the people that they are emulating are having children left, right, and center, having abortions left, right, and center, and the worst one is crediting the abortion with their career, things like that, it's no surprise that that cycle is going to continue. So all of these things don't involve looking to Congress for change. They all look to looking internally to your own soul and looking among your friends and family. And I think they're all very doable things. Just takes doing what is difficult, which is taking responsibility in all areas of life.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for coming today. So we've talked a lot about how the partners can affect women in their abortion. How can fathers specifically in if their sons, but also in raising their daughters with values?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just showing respect for people, especially women, because I think at the heart of if you're a man who is happy for the woman you got pregnant to have an abortion, there's a real just disgusting layer of disrespect there. Because not only do you have no respect for the life you have created in a very predictable way, you have a level of disrespect for the woman in that if she wants the abortion, you have a level of disrespect that you're not willing to be honest with her and what she's about to do. If she doesn't want one, then you're basically pushing her into murder, which I think is really evil and unimaginable. But a lot of those men are out there. A lot of those men out there who push their wives, their girlfriends, their partners, random one-night stands into getting an abortion because it's easier for them. And so in terms of raising boys like that, I think it really comes down to just taking responsibility, as I said in the previous question, for every decision you make. And being comfortable with the fact that might not always go right. You're not always going to make the right decision. But if you stand there and take responsibility, then your entire life is geared towards being really fronting up to the consequences of whatever your actions are. And abortion is the ultimate way of running away from your actions. And so I think it's not rewarding children, but if a child admits to doing something wrong or takes responsibility for something openly or just admits fault, that's something very rare. We see it in the workplace. You'll see it in college. You'll see it with children. I didn't do that. It's like, well, you can raise people to actually be unafraid to admit fault and to yes, I did do that. It was a mistake. I won't do it next time. Like, that's something we should be encouraging. And I think if you have that kind of, it sounds very simple in the context of abortion, but if you have someone who is just accepting of the fact that I will live my life and I will accept the consequences of what I do, whether that means how I eat, how I work, how I exercise, the relationships I have, then the outcome of abortion is something that you won't even consider because you're preempting it. The issue with abortion is no one is preempting anything. They're just doing they're really just following their base desires and then waking up to reality and thinking, oh, I'd rather not follow this path. I want to undo it. We need to live in a world where every path, every step you take in a direction is willing and thoughtful and considered, and to the point where the consequences don't shock you. Like, good things happen, bad things happen. You might get someone pregnant that you would rather they not be, but you've passed the point where you should be making that decision. Like, if that is your thought process once you got someone pregnant, maybe you shouldn't be having sex with them. Like, that's the point to be making that decision. I also think one last thing on this is having very important conversations about relationships and sex and things like that. I think it changes because it depends on how you grow up, your parents' attitude towards sex, school's attitude towards sex education, things like that. But I think people need to be more open to, if you are going to have a sexual relationship with someone, to actually have a conversation of what happens in the biologically predictable outcome that you get pregnant. What is our plan? So many people never have that conversation. Like, the first time they have a conversation is when it's too late. And so I think people need to be adults. If you're going to be having sex, you need to be an adult, not just physically, but like mentally as well. And so I think it's encouraging people to grow up and take responsibility in all areas of life and accept consequences, that then suddenly consequences are predictable rather than just this shocking thing that children just couldn't see coming and just want to sit on the floor and scream and cross their arms, which is essentially what an abortion is, just the most horrific surgical metaphor for not wanting to accept responsibility for your life.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Felipe. I'm a male nursing student here at the university, so obviously in the minority. But my question to you would be, how can male healthcare workers kind of change the narrative that we should not have an opinion in the healthcare field? Mm-hmm. Because, you might know we had an abortion speaker that came here a couple of weeks ago.
Abortion doula. I learned a new word.
Yeah. So
I don't know what that means. That's like standing near the vagina with a shotgun. Exactly. I don't know what that means.
I was right there. I was a student who broke the story, who recorded it. And one thing that I remember from that abortion doula was she asked me what I wanted to do as a male nurse, mm-hmm. and I told her that I wanted to go into obstetrics, right, delivering babies, and she kind of looked at me and she said, "But you're a male, right?" So I guess how can we change that narrative that males can't go into healthcare or be, can't be obstetricians?
Yeah, I think one thing is kudos to you for doing something that is. It's always hard, as a British Jewish person speaking in America about politics, I get told all the time, what are you doing? Go home. But it's always hard to do what you think is right, regardless of if you're in the majority or the minority, but it's harder when you're in the minority. So I think it's great that you're following what you want to do, even though it might be awkward. The first thing I would bring up, the obvious fact of, isn't that a little sexist to be raising that? If you said it the other way around of, you're a woman who wants to be a doctor, what's up with you? That would be shocking, and rightly so, because it's a very sexist thing to say. I think it's indicative of the one-way street that equality is good in a lot of ways in terms of what we've achieved. It should be equality of access, equality of opportunity. But now we've got to the point where it's almost a weapon to be used against men, unfortunately by a lot of women who would quite happily open the doors of equality for themselves and then slam them shut for men who might want to do similar things. And so I think raising the obvious point that it's sexist, but then I also think being unafraid to speak openly. I think that's often the difficult thing, is that men in environments where they're not the majority are pressured with labels of, toxic masculinity and all that nonsense. There are some toxic males out there, like Andrew Tate and his brother, for example. The vast majority of so-called toxic men are not toxic men. They're just men saying things that the women in the room would rather not hear. And you have every right to say what you think, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, and they have every right to say what they think too. Gender has no bearing in morality and truth. And so I think it's just being unafraid to actually say what you think. And to some extent react with the shock that it deserves when someone whose profession is assisting in abortions is shocked that a male would want to help deliver babies rather than kill them. It's a really shocking thing for her to say, for any person to say, again, regardless of gender. So I think holding that person up to the reality of what they just said, if they want to use shock and awe and awkwardness on you, turn it right back around. Force people to stand on what they really believe. It's not a woman's right to choose. It's none of these things. It's like, well, you're cutting and tearing out a living being out of someone else is what you're doing. That's your job. And so if you're proud of that, admit to it. That has nothing to do with gender. Thank you.
It's Bridget Lucas, and I'm a political theory major. And my question for you, love your speech.
Thank you.
My question for you is, so the two Republican presidential candidates, neither of which support a national abortion ban, what are your thoughts on the pro-life organization scrutinizing them for wanting a more bipartisan to gain consensus over like a 10-week, 16-week, whatever?
Yeah, so I think the problem I have with politicians generally is that they're not really playing a game to affect change. They're playing a game to get elected and stay elected. And so I understand to some extent them coming out and saying this, because now that they are ending the primary race, which is the battle in one sport to be the nominee, they're then shifting sports to be the nominee for the entire nation, which is a very different game. It's part of the reason why I really hate primary systems. It's like playing basketball to decide who's going to play a game of football the next week. It makes no sense. But I'm not surprised that every candidate is coming out trying to be so-called moderate on this issue, because it's a losing issue. And if we look at what's happened with the GOP after Roe versus Wade, what happened in Ohio, Ohio is a red state. They voted for Trump in overwhelming numbers, and they voted to protect abortion so-called rights. That's the issue we're facing, is that in terms of legislation, we're losing, because as a movement, we haven't dealt with the cultural really revulsion that abortion deserves. And so we really need to be fighting that battle first, because legislation always follows afterwards. The phrase, politics is downstream from culture. It's very true when it comes to laws. Laws don't really change anything. Laws just mimic what the culture has already decided is normal and right. And so I think we are putting too much responsibility on the backs of people in politics who have really no desire, no motivation to actually deliver on those things. Because you have a couple of other conservatives who are saying they want to ban abortion, but guess what? No one's voting for them. And so how do we fix that? It involves fixing the environment in which they're running to the point where, yes, we should ban abortion is like an obvious thing that we all agree on. Like the idea of slavery, for example. You have to have some level of cultural support to end something that is immoral. You have to have a group-wide understanding that it is immoral before you ban something. Because all we're going to do is see the kind of backlash we get. If you have a lower level ban of abortion, you're going to have a lot of people, oh my God, they're coming for our women's rights. Again, just like the Handmaid's Tale, everything's over. And that's not true, but what people think, it doesn't matter if it's true or false when we're talking about ballots. And so it's all about reaching those people in the culture so that the idea of abortion is so disgusting that the law doesn't really matter. That should be the goal, not achieving something on paper that doesn't really mean anything, especially on a national level. So yeah, to kind of circle back, I'm not surprised that these politicians have come out to try and be more moderate. It is kind of amusing to see Trump occasionally blaming the pro-life movement for various losses. I guess he's running out of people to blame. But I think we need to look at things as slightly separate. I think the pro-life movement is obviously doing incredible things, and there's so much more to do. But there needs to be some separation at times between a pure conservative view and winning in the short term politically. It's just the unfortunate reality. Like, I would love it if the perfect conservative candidate came out with everything that I happen to believe, just clicked their fingers and everything just mimicked what I believe, but that's not the world we live in. So the goal is to always make steps in the right direction in small increments that we can actually achieve. And step one is having someone we hope is a conservative in the White House, right? That's one of many steps. And if we have Joe Biden in the White House, all of these things don't matter. And so I wish they were more open and truthful about views on abortion, but I also understand they're playing a political game. The game sucks, but that's the game they're playing.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm a politics major. So I know this isn't like in line with the statistics you were citing, but I know there are some men who actually don't want their partners to have abortion. And in those cases, a lot of those cases, just according to the law, they don't have a say in that at all. And that's sort of based on this sort of idea of ignoring the fact that the child is the father's child too. And so that sort of idea, I feel like it sort of stems from the same problems that you were bringing up. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how those connect, if you think they do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of unfairness in the world of men versus women on the side of it being more unfair for men. If we look at, for example, divorce settlements, we look at who has children after a divorce, it's overwhelmingly the women, for better or for worse. There's a ton of problems in terms of the breakdown of relationships. But again, that's why you should be having this conversation before you have sex with someone. Because if the idea is that if the woman gets, say you're a man who would never have your partner have an abortion, ever, you would take responsibility, then maybe you should be choosing to have sex with people who share that fundamental value. And if they don't share that value, don't have sex with them. It's a pretty amazing way of guaranteeing that you never have to run into that problem. It's going to be incredibly difficult to find a legal way to provide men with more influence over the choice of abortion because it sidesteps the moral victory we have to have culturally. If people believe that abortion is just like removing, a lump on your arm, there's no human there, but men have a right because they had sex with you to say whether or not you can remove that lump, that's going to be a really hard political battle to have, because then it goes right down to the my body, my choice nonsense. Men need to be protecting themselves and not impregnating women who want to kill that baby. That's the way you solve this. It's just a lot of men don't want to hear that for unfortunately obvious reasons.
Hey for coming. My name is Cameron. I'm a politics major. You said how you agree that a lot of men would probably be pro-abortion if they could get pregnant. To convince them of the morality, what would you recommend reading up on to learn more about the science of life starting at conception to convince men of the morality of abortion in conversation?
Yeah, I think it would be any biology book, right? It's pretty simple. If you think about, I don't know any math majors out there, but the idea of like proof by induction, of if you have something is true at one point and something is true for all next points, then something is wholly true. And if you think about life, if I'm a human now, which hopefully we all agree, some parts of the world, not so, but let's all agree, then a second ago I was also human. And a second before that I was also human. There is only one point where that humanity line obviously stops without any argument otherwise. It's the moment of conception. And if you look at that at babies, let's say a baby was just delivered, kicking, screaming, straight out of the womb. Human then, we can all agree, right? The idea of killing a baby once it's born is abhorrent. Well, what about a second before that? What about in the birth canal? What about at 8 months, at 7 months? There's no line you can draw that is really based in science, let alone morality, beyond the point of conception. Because you can come up with all these arbitrary lines of heartbeats, pain. Pain is the worst one. Pain is horrific to talk about. Oh, if you can kill someone painlessly, it's fine. The idea that something isn't fully developed when everything, if you let it follow a predictable line, will become developed. There's only one line, and that is the point of conception. And so I think if you can understand just biologically what happens, which we know far more now than people did in the past, and you have an idea of basic logic where there is a single point in time where there is no disagreement, the moment before conception, there is no human being there, there is no unique DNA, there's nothing, right? There's a sperm and an egg. And those two things genetically are the same as the person who provided those things, who made those things. The point of conception is the only point at which something changes, and everything beyond that follows a predictable line of development. And so I think there's no reading I can necessarily suggest beyond just having that logical argument cemented in your head, because once you understand that, all the other arguments are just nonsense, right? Every single pro-abortion argument you will have just falls apart the second you have that timeline in your head. The trick is to try and get other people to see that timeline too, and see past all the "you're a man trying to take away my rights" stuff, because they know deep down that we're right. That's the battle that we're fighting, unfortunately.
Hi, I'm Aiden. I'm a politics major as well. Thank you so much for being here. As I was listening to your speech, something that was being reiterated in my mind was what I believe to be the largest, challenge facing the movement, and I think it's always been this way. And with Roe v. Wade, it's only become more prevalent, and that's marketing, honestly, because you can have the right ideas, but if no one knows your ideas, they're either going to remain disagreeing or they're going to think you have false or evil motives. And this is a overspoken point in conservative politics, but when you look at institutional power in America and just, vaguely summarizing them into mainstream media, entertainment, social media, corporate America, trillion-dollar institutions, all of them are firmly on the left social-wise. And these are very powerful institutions with especially really strong influence on the young apparatus, like the young people pretty much. It's like we're all in a very small minority in that regard. So given that's our reality, how do we take what you're talking about and how do we move forward with that in this environment?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, well, really the only thing is to understand this is a generational battle. If you look at what the left have done, they have slowly taken over every single institution, as you said, but over decades. They haven't just woken up one day and think, I'm going to go run banking now. I'm going to go run academia. I'm going to go run medicine. These things have been decades in the making, and conservatives are simply not, many cases, not willing to do that. They're not willing to put in generational level work to take control of institutions. What people would rather do is run on fixing everything, of like, elect me and the deep state will go away. No, it won't. Elect me and academia will suddenly not be woke again. No, it won't. Because people aren't willing to put in the decades of work that it takes to actually push your ideology through your work. I think there's some understandable level to that, as a lot of conservatives like to lead their politics separate and just do the job at hand. But there has to be a line in your head of where it's appropriate, right? When you're seeing your fundamental values being destroyed in your workplace, then I think where you have some duty to do something. And if we do that collectively, we can have a huge, really huge impact. But conservatives in many ways aren't willing to do that. If we look at conservative politics, a lot of the time, all our side does is point to what the other side are doing and making a funny face, right? That's the vast majority of commentary you see. If you scroll Instagram or TikTok, almost everything I see these days are so-called reaction videos, which is a video of someone else watching a video of someone else. And that's our level of commentary, and that's supposed to be changing the culture. It's not going to change anything. It's getting them clicks, but there's like a level of real disinterest in actually affecting change through your work without necessarily making a lot of money doing it. Like a lot of these people who've taken over institutions have done it for free because that's what they believe. I think conservatives need to be similarly motivated, and this is what I believe, and I want it to be a way I run my life. So whether it be me getting involved in low-level schooling with the eventual goal of us as a generation and future generations changing how education is done. Because as you all know, in college, most academic institutions are run by people who've been there for decades who are on the left. And how do you change that? You don't just fire them all. Over generations, you have people who are on the right going into these positions of power and then affecting change through that in that way. I think also there needs to be a level of ability to just accept the discomfort of being publicly conservative. I never call on people who are conservative to be outwardly conservative if they're not willing to or able to, because frankly, not everyone can, right? There's a lot of people, their livelihoods depend on them basically keeping their head down. I'm not going to tell you to go get fired if you can't afford it. But I think everyone can do small things to some extent. This really motivates why I'm doing what I was doing. I was working in tech. It was in no way political. And I saw the country changing and a country that I'd grown to love. And so how do I actually change things for the better? In a very small way, I try and do it through what I'm doing now. Not everyone can make that change. It's for each person to decide what is best for them. If we as a movement collectively, everyone was pushing in that direction rather than just being ambivalent, we could affect huge change over the long term. It's just everyone wants it short term. I think something that really shows this to me is when I go to so-called conservative colleges, you'd expect the crowds to be bigger. It's completely the opposite. When I go to left-wing colleges, the crowds are always bigger. When I go to colleges where everyone agrees with me, no one cares. It needs to be either the other way around or both, right? It should be when you have conservatives engaging with political issues on campus, on a conservative campus, everyone needs to be working together to push in that direction. Not it's like, oh, we already agree, why am I going to bother? Because everyone needs to understand we're fighting a battle beyond our immediate circle. So yeah, just be willing to work, I think, is the summary there. And a lot of people aren't.
I'm Riley. I'm a double major in politics and clinical psych here. And I consider myself to be a pro-choice woman, but I also, hope my goal is that women never have to have elective abortions. And I want to do everything I can to reduce abortion in practical ways. I think you said something really interesting, and I really liked your talk a lot. Which is that, it's not up to Congress necessarily to make these decisions. Do you think that and I'm not sure if that's what you meant exactly.
I said it's more they're not able to.
They're not able to. Okay. Do you think that that some of these really ultra restrictive abortion bans being proposed in certain state legislatures failed? I think that a lot of them fail to, have consulted with medical providers who really have this experience and fail to consider medical reality. for a lot of women who are, in cases of non-elective abortions. Do you think that creates more fear for women than, perhaps maybe we can put some of those resources into practical ways to actually reduce abortion and support women, like birth control, perhaps abstinence, comprehensive education, whatever you want to preach? Do you think that restrictive abortion bans perhaps cause more division and fear amongst women who are pregnant? I mean, I know women who have had preeclampsia in the 3rd trimester and of a wanted pregnancy and had to have an abortion. I know women who are bipolar suicidal on lithium and they have the fetus has abnormalities because of that and they can't get off their medication without having to be in a psych ward. I know women who have had ectopic pregnancies. I know women who have had miscarriages and had to get abortions to remove fetal tissue. I feel as if a lot of the time the pro-life movement really negates that medical reality, and it's just science. So I'm just wondering, what can we do? What can we do in the legislature to make sure that these abortion bans are including women who, are there's women that are dying of sepsis in hospitals in southern states, like because the ethical review board of the hospital won't approve, their abortion.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack there. So please let me know if I missed any of your points. I think one, it's very important to be very clear that something like an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion. Like Planned Parenthood say as much. The removal of post-miscarriage tissue is not an abortion, right? It's very clear.
And in medical terms, it's considered to be an abortion.
But there is not a removal of life, right? Once a miscarriage has occurred. And so I think one thing we can probably agree on is that the wording of a lot of these laws are very poor, which is a marketing opportunity for the people who hate those laws. I don't have a problem with states coming out with what you call restrictive, what I call is just like an acknowledgement of moral reality. But regardless of where we stand on what you think that law is, if they are mirroring, by nature of being a legislature, the feeling of their state, I have no problem with that. That's kind of what Roe versus Wade being overturned was getting at, is that this should be in the hands of the state. The problem is that if the law is written too vaguely to the point there is any loophole, even though the cases you raised are the tiny minority, they still do happen. And so then all law should be written specifically enough to the point where there is no gray area. When we're talking about life or death, which is literally what we're talking about, there should be no gray area. There should be no ability to run into any case where there is a concern, whether true or not, right? Because even if we're thinking about it really cynically as a marketing opportunity for the pro-abortion side, we should want these laws to be written as clearly as possible, and often they're not. It's also a failure of the GOP generally to handle, as I said, the post-Roe versus Wade stuff of just people rushing to be seen to be banning abortion, rather than actually taking the time to do this properly and accurately, which I think is, again, points to the marketing issue we've talked about previously. And so I think a big part of your question as well is like the women who are maybe being what you see as victimized by the legislature. Were you also asking, because there were a lot of questions in that, have I all those? I think also if we're talking about really what many people want to talk about is the victimization of women as a result of any legislation. I think a lot of this also needs to be coming to the point of honesty where if the law is written specifically enough so that miscarriages are not for some reason classified as an abortion, ectopic pregnancies and the removal of those are not classified. But then we also get to then what really is the debate, which is, say, the lithium issue you raised, or fetal abnormalities and those kind of things. And there is a reasonable moral argument to be had of that doesn't make abortion right. The fact that there is something quote unquote wrong with the baby, or maybe the medication that the mother is on, those still fall under the category of taking responsibility. It's a bad answer for a lot of people because, like, a baby with an abnormality, no one wants that. A baby with possibly damage done due to the medication that the mother was taking while pregnant, no one wants that. But that doesn't change the fact, really, the fundamental building block of my logic, which is that is a human life. And so we can have that debate. But I think for me, I don't share your conclusion, but I share the frustration with the wording of language like this because I think it does damage long-term steps we make in the direction of ending abortion, usually because a lot of politicians want to be seen as, look at me, I banned abortion. It's like, well, no, you didn't really. What you did is you reduced the number of abortions, but then you also handed a massive marketing opportunity to the other side to paint us as villains, which we may or may not be. But I think
a lot of times women go seeking abortions in other states.
Yeah, but then that's not necessarily an argument against any kind of legislation. That's always the funny thing when people say people are going to do it anyway. It's like, well, murder is illegal. People murder still. But I think we need to be actually focusing. That's always why I come back to culture, and I very rarely talk about legislation, because again, legislation might mirror the general majority feeling on abortion in a state. Nationally, no way. And the fact is that the left, or the pro-abortion movement, or however you want to define them, they control the marketing, they control the public perception of the issue, and so legislation alone will never fix this. If anything, it will make people dig their heels in even harder. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to admit that. I don't think it's really counterproductive. Doesn't mean I think those laws are wrong, because again, they're mirroring what I believe to be true, and they're mirroring what people who voted these politicians in believe to be true. But it also matters how things are worded. And specificity in language is unfortunately missing in our society, and we see the outcome in situations like this, unfortunately.
In the case that the mother's life is in danger, would you say that you support the mother's life being saved, or would you both, or what's your?
Yeah, so I think there's a few important layers here. I think one is there are very few cases where the woman's life is actually in danger as a result of a pregnancy.
And there are very few cases where trans women are playing in sports. That's still a major issue.
Oh yeah, but don't get me started on that whole thing.
Same feeling as you do, believe it or not.
So it's
it still is a violation.
It's
it's a major issue. Yeah.
So I think in terms of the numbers, we need to understand that it's a tiny minority. My first answer there is always, how do you feel about elective abortions, right? Because quite often people use that in bad faith just to say, basically to force me to defend rape, which is actually something, like, to be completely open, the case of rape is the only one where I'm morally unsure, because the issue of consent is central to sex. You cannot argue that someone should take responsibility for an act they had no really say in performing. And so I think that's where I always come down on that side. But in terms of saving the woman's life, a lot of people in this field that I've spoken with, and my understanding is that's incredibly rare, if not non-existent, because a lot of the time you can deliver the baby in order to actually prevent that medical issue. The number of cases
with a severe risk to your life. I mean, in my
yes,
opinion,
of course, but nothing. All pregnancy is a risk.
I don't think a woman should have to risk her life in any scenario. I mean, I know that giving birth is a risk, absolutely. But I think if you are preeclamptic, or you have endometriosis and got pregnant, or there's another medical complication there, I think it's almost misogynistic to say that the value of a life, which some legislators would say at 6 weeks, is actually equivalent to a grown woman. But
I don't think we're making that argument. Okay. Because we're not literally choosing, do I shoot this woman in the head or do I shoot the baby in the head? Because my answer there, if you're forcing me morally to choose between killing one or the other, I would choose to kill the baby and not the mother, because you're comparing them on a scale where one is a human being who has been born and the other is what some people will term as a potential life. It's still a life, but they are morally, if you force me to kill one or the other, but that's not the decision that's being made. That's the decision that's being used as an umbrella to force me into making a decision. But we are choosing between definitely killing a baby or potentially harming the mother through a less than ideal outcome. And I don't think those two are morally equivalent. And then when we get down the route of elective abortions, when we're talking about things like mental health, I think that's even more of a can of worms, because it's completely subjective. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of the language on the other side, when we talk about the physical and mental health of the mother, well, what does physical health mean? Because no doctor is standing there like, we're going to lose one or the other. Which do we choose? Like, as a Jewish person, there's a lot of teachings on saving the life of the mother if you have to make that choice. And I know some Christians will fall on the other side. There's reasonable debate there. But I think the problem there is that's not the question that is being asked. The question is somewhere between risk to the mother or inconvenience to the mother, something on that spectrum, which is where all of these abortions live, and 100% chance of death to the baby. And so that's why I always push back on the question, because you're not choosing between killing one or killing the other. You're choosing between killing one and maybe bad things happening to the other. And I don't think that's an equal choice. Thank you for your question.
This is going to be our last question. But Ian, thank you so much for your talk. It was amazing. But I just kind of had a quick question. As college students, if we know a couple or a woman who has gotten pregnant, how can we kind of support the mother or the couple and kind of encourage them to choose life?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think ultimately a lot of the solutions to all of our problems in life come down to us taking responsibility, to our family taking responsibility, to our community taking responsibility. Unfortunately, our entire society is a pyramid with us in the majority at the bottom, and then local government above that supposed to do things for us, state government above that supposed to do things for us, and federal government on top of that supposed to do things for us, and then someone in the White House who's meant to lord all over it like some kind of king or queen. We've got it completely backwards. Every single time we run into a problem, people are always looking to what's Congress going to do about it. It's a fundamental failing of how we look at problems in our life. And so I think if you know someone who's in this situation, for example, just supporting them with conversation, making them know that they are loved and actually supported and you're willing to help, whether that be with your time, with your effort, with money, if you have the ability to do so. There are also so many resources out there, like pregnancy crisis centers. There are churches out there who do a tremendous amount to actually support mothers, both before birth and after birth. There's so much more we can be doing. We can be really legislating better in terms of adoption, I think is a huge failing in our system. But again, a lot of that we shouldn't be looking upwards to do. We should be looking among ourselves. So I think just being there for someone and being willing to discuss this and actually hear someone's concerns and let someone know that you are there for them and you actually follow through. There are a lot of people, oh my God, you're having a baby, that's so cool. And the moment the baby comes and it's difficult and someone's up all night, it's like, no, I won't come babysit. I'd rather just stay home, watch TV. A lot of it is the low level, what people view as difficult stuff, which is just being there to actually help someone. Because as I said in the speech, a lot of women who get abortions feel to some extent alone, whether that be physically alone, emotionally alone, financially alone. And so I think just being present and being available is a huge step in the right direction. It's not going to fix everything, but it's a huge step in the right direction. It's something everyone can do for free. Is to be a voice of support is free. And not always easy, but I think we can all push ourselves to be better. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you everyone so much.
I know I sound like a broken record, but thank you all so much for coming here. This was honestly probably my favorite question line we've ever done. Thank you everyone who asked questions. Those were some really great questions on a lot of different topics. Again, I wanted to invite you, even those that may not agree with everything you heard here, I wanted to invite you to join us at our meeting on February 15th. We'll be covering some upcoming speakers that we have, including a bunch of different topics. So if you liked this setup, if you liked hearing from cool speakers like Ian, please join us for that. Feel free to talk to Sarah, especially if you are interested in journalism, and grab some stuff on the back. But again, thank you all so much for coming.